Hello and welcome to Talk Lit Get Hit, a podcast where we read questionable books recommended to us by social media and talk shit about them.
We're Bridget, Erin and Laura, three friends who haven't mentally progressed since high school, where we bonded over a love of music and books, but mainly Twilight.
Brace yourself for a heady cocktail of somewhat highbrow and incredibly lowbrow ramblings about all the books the internet loves and our journey to figure out why.
Welcome back to the show and welcome to the third episode of our Twilight Saga Megamix extravaganza. This episode we are, of course, discussing Eclipse by Stephenie Meyer and trying to figure out if we, like Bella, can be Switzerland when it comes to territorial disputes between mythical creatures, whether we are Team Edward or Team Jacob, and whether, after all this time, the events of this book are simply too much to handle. Once again, we're foregoing our monthly catch-up. We did spend a little bit of time catching up on our Twilight episode, and if you haven't already, it's a pretty good listen, so I would highly recommend checking out our Twilight episode and our New Moon episodes, because honestly, it just makes sense. We're 3 books in, and you gotta have a bit of an idea of what's going on.
What are you doing?
But we thought we would do something a little bit different, and our sacred provider, Bridget, has provided us with some Twilight trivia.
I'm so excited.
I don't know if I'm doing a good job of selling this, but trust us, guys. It's going to be really good.
Funny. It's going to be good.
I've picked a random quiz for us to do just to see if we actually know what we're talking about.
No. I'm confident no.
Yeah, I am feeling a little underconfident on your behalf, Erin, because I will say that we watched a Eclipse recap video just now.
Full of memes.
And Erin said, "Who's Riley?"
Even though she's literally just finished the book. Like yesterday.
Slammed. I seriously didn't know that was his name, but I know who the character's meant to be now. And that's the main thing.
And you will probably get that trivia question right. So
yeah,
exactly. That was studying.
We've all got to learn somehow.
You don't know what you don't know. Am I right, ladies?
So this quiz is called How Well Do You Know Eclipse? So we're starting with some easy ones.
Okay,
Number
ease our
1.
way in.
Jacob tells Bella about Leah Clearwater and somebody having a relationship in high school. Who did Leah Clearwater have as her high school lover? Sam.
Poor Leah.
Number 2. You're trying to protect your virtue. Who says this in chapter 20?
Bella says it, doesn't she?
She says it to Edward.
Yeah.
Yeah, third one. What was the name of Rosalie's fiancé in her mortal life?
Wouldn't have a clue. Mr. Man?
I think he's a prince of some description, or
think
like an
he's just
archduke or some shit.
Local rich guy. Royce King II.
Oh my God. See, I was close.
Yeah, you were close.
A king.
Okay, number 4. To Bella, it seems like Edward's eyes get something every time she says Jacob's name.
Darker.
Yeah, I think so. Number 5. At the graduation party, Alice changes into what clothes? Oh, I know. Do you know?
Oh, isn't it like a shimmery disco
Yeah, like
dress?
a sequin. No, it's a top.
Oh,
and I
stop
think
it,
it's
does
like
she-
leather pants.
Oh, leather pants.
Are you
red,
for real?
red leather pants.
Yeah.
And like a sequined, I think it's like a,
Like a
in my
halter
head,
neck?
it's like a halter neck.
Honestly,
oh my God, get out of here.
What a sleigh. That
Like
sounds
full on
great.
Britney Spears.
Like
Yeah.
one of those like weirdly like metal ones, and when they move it looks like water.
Chainmail kind of.
Chainmail, that's what I'm after, yeah.
Sequined tank top and red leather pants.
That's insane.
I love it.
It's a high
Yeah.
school graduation party, Alice. Like
Cool it with the leather pants.
Number 6. The night Bella comes home from Florida, Charlie tells Bella that Jacob's been blowing up the phone. And when Bella calls him back, he asks if she's going to be at school tomorrow. When Bella and Edward come to school, they see Jacob. And to others, Jacob looks,
like a bad boy.
yeah, like scary.
Like he's in a gang or some shit.
Yeah,
Everyone
I mean,
gets real nervy.
is this when they're taking bets on like who's gonna like win
Yeah, I
Bella's
think
love?
so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think, and the principal calls the police or
Or
threatens
he threatens to. Yes,
Yeah.
I forgot about that. The other
Nice.
kids all think he looks dangerous. Question 7. In the book, Edward and Bella walk into the house and see most of the Cullens sitting around. They are considering there is a serial killer in Seattle. Carlisle pipes up, and on what channel does he say several debates were on?
Fox.
I reckon
CNN.
because they watch it in Breaking Dawn as well.
Okay.
CNN had specialists debating the theory.
Wish I could get paid to debate whether or not there's a serial killer in Seattle.
I'm going with yeah.
Like,
There's lots of people dying.
what's the counter argument? Like,
No.
no, they're not dying.
It's people are gonna die, but it's like inevitable.
Number 8. What does Edward think of Wuthering Heights?
He hates it.
He thinks they're both terrible people, doesn't he?
But then it depends how far the answer's going, because he does come around by the end of Eclipse and he goes, I understand Heathcliff now.
Yeah.
Shut up, Edward.
He doesn't like it because he thinks at least one of them needs redeeming qualities.
You and me both, sis.
Check out a mirror, Edward.
Different books, yeah.
Number 9. Who does Edward think is better for Bella than himself?
Jacob.
Mike Newton.
I think it's Mike.
It's Mike.
Because doesn't she get really offended?
I think so, yeah.
I think that sounds
Jacob
right.
Black.
Oh.
But I think there is also a discussion
He's definitely
about,
had a throwaway comment, because he says it several times. Like in Twilight, he even says it.
Number 10, last one. When Rosalie shares her story with Bella, she says she was jealous of one of her friends when they got married. What was her friend's name?
That's a hard one. I think
Such a pointless one.
She had a little boy with blue eyes.
it's Mary.
Eileen?
Is it Vera?
Oh,
I
that
don't
sounds
think
most
so.
accurate.
I would remember if it was.
Okay, let's see. Vera. Rosalie gets jealous when she sees Vera's husband come
How
home
is that possible?
and kiss both her and their beautiful son Henry.
Why would you remember?
Vera is my middle name. I feel like I would remember if it was
that's
in
funny.
there. That's insane.
Well, we got 9 out of 10.
That is good.
Alrighty, well, let's just get into the episode. Like we said, if you've listened to our previous episodes on Twilight and New Moon, then you are well aware how we were thinking and feeling at this point in time in our lives when we first read these books, and the absolute chokehold that these books had on our lives, except perhaps for Erin, as we have discovered.
I feel like it did, but I just don't remember.
But if you haven't listened to those episodes, this is the second plug to get out of here and go and do that. And while you're at it, subscribe to the show, please, and thank you. However, we are now up to the 3rd book in this saga, and some of us have had our confidence rocked by false memories of the series. Some of us have remembered little to none about the events of the book, and
I'm feeling called out by both of those. That's just me both times.
no, I've been really shocked by some of the things that I completely forgot happened. As they appear on the page, I'm like, oh shit. But I had no memory of it until I read it. And then, yes, of course, there are some of us that seem to know every word. Let's set the scene. We're 29 in the prime of our lives, and we're about to reread Eclipse. How are we all feeling? Bridget, how about you?
It's not my favourite. It's not my least favourite. I like the concept of the newborn army. I think it's clever, but I do know that it is a big book and not much happens.
I was excited going into Eclipse. I had no recollection of what actually happens in Eclipse. And not even reading New Moon reminded me what happens in Eclipse. I vaguely remembered a tent scene, but could not remember how we got there or why we got to a tent. So I was excited to hopefully finally see some fucking action, because I was sick of nothing happening. And yet...
Sounds a bit like Bella.
Different kinds of action, I guess. What about you, Laura? Where were you at?
I think I remember this one being probably my least favourite. I think coming into this following New Moon, I was not super excited because I just thought it was more of what I didn't like about New Moon, which was Bella and Edward and Jacob going back and forth, being awful to each other and having barely developed emotions that they were rashly acting upon. So I was kind of exhausted in anticipation. That said, there's just something about these books that kept me so excited, and I was still thinking, gosh, I can't wait to go home and read that though.
Before we get into discussing the book, this is your usual reminder to get out now if you've not read the books and you don't want any spoilers. Content warning for all the things. We're discussing themes of abuse, racism, mental illness, suicide and violence, but always make sure to do your own checks before proceeding.
As Seattle is ravaged by a string of mysterious killings and a malicious vampire continues her quest for revenge, Bella once again finds herself surrounded by danger.
In the midst of it all, she is forced to choose between her love for Edward and her friendship with Jacob, knowing that her decision has the potential to ignite the ageless struggle between vampire and werewolf.
With her graduation quickly approaching, Bella has one more decision to make, life or death. But which is which? Book 3, down the hatch, and as always, we have struggled to succinctly address our initial feelings, but if you could briefly summarise your post-reading experience without going into too much detail, how would you say you're feeling?
I wish that you said cut the shit again.
It would have been more succinct.
Cut the shit, down the hatch.
I really enjoyed reading Eclipse. I finished Eclipse really excited to talk about Eclipse. It's probably the one I've been most excited to talk about.
I was staggered by this book. I found a lot to talk about. I don't think I necessarily enjoyed reading it, but I'm excited to talk about it.
I think that in this book, the characters annoyed me the most out of all the books. I think there are some really complex themes in the book. And if you take away the day-to-day dialogue and just absolute horse shit that is.
So 60% of the book.
Yeah, I think the actual themes underlying are really interesting and the concepts are really interesting.
As we've done with the previous episodes, we really need to address the bananas timeline.
This shit is bananas.
It really is bananas.
E-C-L-I-P-S-E.
Ooh, pop off.
The timeline of events, though, it is bananas, and I think this is the best one yet. So once again, you're going to have to bear with me, but as always, it's going to be worth it. So something before I start discussing this timeline is a little note from the end of New Moon. So the end of New Moon takes place on the 7th of April, and this is where Jacob confronts Edward and Bella, reminds them about the treaty, and gives Bella her motorcycle back, which causes some beef. So New Moon ends on the 7th of April and Eclipse kicks off on the 14th of May. Once again, trouble is afoot with rogue vampires running amok, Alice's visions, and Edward withholding information from Bella.
Standard.
Edward is intensely overbearing from the 15th of May through to the 25th of May, where Bella makes a break from the shackles of his love to visit Jacob at La Push and announce that she's Switzerland. In the 5 days between the 31st of May and the 5th of June, Alice holds Bella hostage at the request of Edward. Bella tells Jacob that she will be a vampire soon, and he goes berserk and says some really hateful things. They realise another vampire has been inside her house with potentially sinister intentions. Bella spends some time at La Push and learns about werewolf legends and the third wife. Alice plans a graduation party, and Edward and Bella discuss their imminent marriage. So a lot going on.
In 5 days?
In 5 days.
My God.
June 7th is the first day of finals, and on the second day of finals, the very next day, Jacob tells Bella he loves her, kisses her without her permission, and Bella breaks her hand punching his face.
Just like, how do they even have time to hang out in the middle of finals?
I was just about to say, why is she hanging out during finals?
I know.
Just wait a week.
On the 11th of June, Bella puts the puzzle together and realises Victoria is behind it all, and the wolves and vamps get down to business and form an alliance quick smart. Over the next few days, some stuff happens, but honestly, it's too boring to mention. Alice discusses graduation outfits, Bella sleeps, and also gets a charm bracelet.
Very 2000s.
I remember frothing that the first time reading it, though. I love a charm
Just
bracelet.
one little comment about the charm bracelet. She is so dumb. She was like, wait, it's a diamond? What did you think it was?
Yeah, you
I
fucking
know.
know. And like, how is it being crystal somehow better than it being diamond anyway?
Oh
like,
my goodness me.
Anyway.
Sorry. It
Brush
really...
it off. Walk it out, ladies. So on the 13th, Edward finally concedes defeat. He will tap that while she is still human, as long as she marries him first. Bella gives in, gets a new charm for her bracelet, and also an engagement ring.
Oh, I forgot about that.
The next day, battle is afoot. We get the infamous space heater scene, and when dawn breaks, Jacob is learning of their engagement and threatening suicide. It's so extreme. It's so extreme. Bella kisses Jacob, realizes she loves him, tries to get freaky with Edward out of guilt, and is at the center of yet another werewolf attack. F's up the plan and is thinking once again only of herself. Finally, she says g'day to the Volturi and calls it a day. What a busy bee. It's been a big couple of days. With all that done and dusted, the next day, on the 16th of June, Bella and Edward tell Alice about the wedding. She shows them a dress she has already picked out, and likely that evening they break the wedding news to Charlie. This book takes place over the course of a month.
Get fucked. That's not possible.
Eclipse kicks off on the 14th of May and wraps up on the 16th of June.
That is insane. What?
And like in some respects it makes things, that short period of time makes things a bit better for me. Like I thought Edward was absolutely controlling her for months and months, like banning her from spending time with Jacob. I don't think it's right he did that in the first place, but if he only did it a couple of days and then changed his tune, it's a lot more tolerable.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, one day's fine.
Kidnap is okay if you do it in small doses.
Disclaimer, no it's not.
Between 1 and 3 days. That's fine. It's just like a grace
Short-term
period.
kidnapping.
Yeah.
Not over
It's a
weekends.
legal term. You wouldn't understand.
So Stephenie Meyer writes these books and ties them into the school year. So it makes, or like tricks you into thinking that it's for the duration of the school year, each book. And so it's a year. But as Laura's done with these timelines, it's obviously a lot less than that. And this book is really long, but it's a month?
It's the longest one and the shortest timeline.
That's
the longest
fucked
one
up.
we've read so far.
We're what, like 18 months into their relationship? And they're getting engaged. And as we discussed in the New Moon episode, Edward has been absent for 6 of those months.
And on top of that, Bella is still undecided about how serious her feelings for Jacob are and if they're something she's willing to kind of sacrifice Edward for. She's toing and froing. There's been a few attempts on her life. She doesn't want to get married, seemingly, but she's doing it anyway.
Yeah, like that whole thing is, it's just insane that she was like, yeah, okay, let's get married. Even though she doesn't want to get married, she has no interest in being married. She's obviously got doubts about her relationship. She thinks she maybe has feelings for another guy. How in her brain is that time to get engaged? And after all the shit she's given her mum for like being fickle and like immature and shit, and she's like, yeah, this is the right time to be engaged.
Maybe we can start off talking about the marriage because it's kind of a source of lots of conflict throughout this book. Seeing as we're already here, like I don't see why not. Nothing that new is happening with Bella apart from the fact that she's getting worse. And I think the marriage element is a key component of what made me so annoyed at her throughout this book.
Bella is on her high horse about Renee for the whole series. Even when she's debating whether or not she should get engaged, she thinks about Renee and Renee's choices. And I can't remember if she actually says it or if it's like inferred that she doesn't want to make her mother's mistakes.
It's not quite that. I think that Renee has drilled it into her from a very young age.
Yeah.
Do not make my mistakes. So I think she's scared of what her mum is going to say. I'm sure at the same time she would be judgy because it's Bella. It's going against what she's been taught.
I think what you're saying is right because there's a quote on page 45 where she says, I couldn't help but think of my mother's most life-altering mistake. Silly and romantic, getting married fresh out of high school to a man she barely knew, then producing me a year later. She'd always promised me that she had no regrets, that I was the best gift her life had ever given her. And yet she drilled it into me over and over. Smart people took marriage seriously. Mature people went to college and started careers before they got deeply involved in a relationship. She knew I would never be as thoughtless and as goofy and as small town as she had been. I was struggling to interpret that as well because I think I thought that was Bella saying like, oh, she thought I'd never be those things and yet here I am, like, I'm going to do it. What did you think that was how she was interpreting that as well?
Based on like the word use, I assumed that those were words that Renee had used to describe herself. And Bella was, saying, she thought I'd never do it, but here I am doing it. Which, again, it's so sad. She's so mean about Renee, even though she does the exact same shit that Renee did.
Yeah, the exact same thing. I had not really noticed that until you pointed it out in a previous episode, how she is exactly Renee in the decisions she makes, but she continuously shits on Renee and like looks down on her life in a way. I think that's so interesting.
This book is another example of where I'm trying to balance, like, this is a teenage character doing teenager things, but also just being an asshole. Like, she's so mean to Charlie in this book. And acknowledging that Charlie is also a bit of a prick in this book. He is not always on Bella's side. Not that he has to be as a parent, but he should probably be on some of these issues. But she's always like, fuck it, I'll just move out there and I don't give a shit about you, Dad. Like, I can do whatever I want. And he's like, whoa, let's dial it back. Let's simmer down a little bit here.
We're just having a discussion, Bella.
Yeah, like, we don't have to go to the, like, moving out place.
Maybe you don't need to marry this guy. Like,
yeah, like I am a Charlie stan, but he's trying his best here. He is trying to parent an unparentable child at this point, and she is lashing out in the hugest of ways, and he doesn't know what to do. And, like, he makes really good points that she should be hanging out with other friends and other people and not centering her whole life on Edward Cullen. And yeah, he's definitely a bit pushy on the Jacob thing, and that's really weird, and very forgiving when Jacob kisses her without consent. But then later is like, no one should ever do anything you don't consent to. Like,
Yeah,
he's,
but
he's
in front of Jacob, he's accepting of it, which
Yeah,
is
like-
the worst bit.
Yeah.
sending mixed messages.
Yeah,
That was so disappointing. I was like, oh, Charlie, please.
Yeah, we were all rooting for you. Bella is just really on one in this book.
She's learned a lot of manipulation over the past few books because
Yeah.
if we could return back to the marriage, I think something that I found really staggering was towards the end of the book when Edward is giving her the ring and they start laying out these conditions they have for one another. Conditions Edward has if he's going to turn her into a vampire. Conditions Bella
compromises.
has.
Negotiations.
Yeah, like they're calling them compromises, but I don't think you
Incredible.
should be making compromises in these aspects of your life. These are very important decisions and you should never be getting married with conditions attached, I don't think. I don't know. Like, I suppose it depends on how extreme they are, but these are no small ask. There's this quote from Bella on page 445. She says, "Tell me if I have anything wrong." I tried to sound detached. "Your demands are marriage." I couldn't say the word without making a face. "Paying my tuition, more time, and you wouldn't mind if my vehicle went a little faster." I raised my eyebrows. Did I get everything? That's a hefty list. Only the first is a demand. He seemed to be having a hard time keeping a straight face. The others are merely requests. Bella says, "And my lone, solitary little demand is..." "Demand?" he interrupted, suddenly serious again. "Yes, demand." His eyes narrowed. And this is where Bella says, "Getting married is a stretch for me. I'm not giving in unless I get something in return." I just found that breathtaking in its hypocrisy, I guess, because the whole marriage thing came around because she has demanded she wants to be equal. She wants to be a vampire, and he's told her again and again, "No, I don't want that for you. I don't think that's a good decision. If you want these things, they're not coming to you via me." But she keeps pushing him and pushing him. And granted, like, he does, he can say no, but she's not making it very easy for him.
I agree, but I also think what's interesting here, so in this whole book, everyone is telling Bella what to do all the time. And I think the marriage thing is meant to be seen as her pushing back and reclaiming her power and, like, making her own stand. But she's not, because in the end, she's still doing exactly what she was told to do, which was to get married.
Mm-hmm.
It's so interesting to me the way that everyone just decides, like, the graduation party was decided for her, her outfit was decided for her, the wedding outfit was decided for her, the whole thing. And most of the time they talk about her like she's not even there. It's disgusting, like ignoring the way that Edward and Jacob do all that macho bullshit and make decisions on her behalf while she's present but not in the conversation somehow. Like, I think the wedding thing is just super interesting because we're supposed to think that that's her doing it on her terms, and it just isn't. She's not.
Like when they get partway through to like the end of the day of the wedding and she actually sees herself for the first time. She's never seen the dress. She has no idea what her hair looks like. She has no idea what her makeup looks like. And it's the end of her wedding day. She's had no input on this. She didn't even want to get married. Maybe that's why.
I suspect what we're meant to feel is that, oh, Bella doesn't care about those things. Bella,
She's not like other girls.
she's not like other girls. She doesn't care what she looks like because she thinks that she's not hot anyway or whatever. But it just really comes across as she's being forced to do all these things. Like, she is the Cullens doll and she just gets dressed up and put in these situations because she's the human doll and they've not had these human experiences.
It makes for a continuously uncomfortable read because it's not just one major life decision she's grappling with in this book. It's like at least 3. As well as that, she seems to be a little bit on the fence about becoming a vampire. She keeps having these moments of clarity where she's like, oh shit, like I would never be able to see Charlie again. Like I'd have to completely cut myself off from my friends. I'd have to make all these excuses. I would never get to do XYZ. And she has these moments that aren't too little too late, but they are sort of coming to her at an unusual time as the reality becomes a little bit more clear.
I've always been in two minds about the whole wedding storyline. I've never understood why it matters to her to get married. She's already made her choice. She's going to be a vampire. She's going to become immortal so she can spend the rest of her life with Edward. So I don't understand what her problem is with getting married. And I understand she's worried about her image, but she's really not, because the second she meets them, she's changed her whole identity. Everything she does is orbiting around him. So I don't know why all of a sudden she's worried about what everybody will think. She doesn't care about what anyone else. She doesn't care about anyone else, full stop. So I don't understand why it was such a struggle for her to accept getting married. But then at the same time, I don't understand why Edward put such a big emphasis on marriage. And maybe it's because of the religion side of Stephenie Meyer, like that aspect of it. Once again, I just think he should know if she's willing to become a vampire and he thinks that is the worst thing in the world, why does he want her to get married?
I agree. I think this is an interesting line for Bella to draw as well, because as you said, she's already committed her whole life to this. She said time and time again, this is it for me. This is forever for me. Mm-hmm. Marriage should not be scarier than that idea. Like, that's actually the same idea, that you're with Edward forever and you're going to get married because you're forever. Like, it's the same thing.
Exactly.
The call is coming from inside the house.
But I also think that I don't know if it's marriage that she is reluctant to do. I think it is the wedding, the actual event. And I understand that Alice wanted to plan the wedding, but get married at the registry office or whatever it's called. And get married at the courthouse. It solves all their problems. Everyone's happy. Like, no one knows. No one has to know.
But I think also, like, the concept of it being a marriage is probably the first time it's really been real to Bella, what forever might look like. Because marriage is something she conceptually understands and she's seen it break down before. Now she's like, oh, but if we get married and it doesn't work, then I'm going to be just like my parents. And they thought it was forever as well. And then they got married and it fucked it up. Like, it's probably also that she just couldn't conceptualize what forever looked like or felt like until marriage got applied to it. And then maybe she realized that forever isn't achievable or like a real thing in her experience.
It would have served to strengthen Bella's personality a lot more if, rather than having the Cullens make her decisions for her, she had said to them, it's not the issue of marriage that freaks me out. It's the spectacle. You know, I don't like being seen in front of a bunch of people. Like, let's just make it a small thing. I want to do X, Y, Z. Like, that would have been a compromise. That would have been her standing up for herself. That would have been her having thoughts and feelings and opinions. I just think, you know, what's lost by her doing that?
And you're absolutely right. That's an actual compromise compared to how compromises are weaponized in this story.
I would love to know, once again, everything that Stephenie Meyer was thinking, but I think it would be interesting to hear her opinion on when is the right time for Bella and Edward to get married, because Bella thinks that right now she's too young. Is it after college? Is it 25? Is it 30? Because as we realized in the last recording of the last episode, Stephenie got married herself when she was about 20. For me, I feel like that is way too young. Like, I'm 29 and still struggling to plan a wedding. But as Erin said yesterday, child bride at 20. So I would really love to know, what is Bella's ideal age for marriage? I don't think she says it at any point.
And that's the thing. Like, Bella never gives them the alternative. She always gives them a really outrageous compromise. She never says, I don't want to get married now, but in 5 years' time, that sounds better to me. Or, I don't want a big wedding. I want to do it like this. She always says something pretty crazy, like a pretty unmatchable demand. I don't think that's a healthy portrayal of compromise.
It's not, but it's also how a child compromises.
It's true.
Like,
she is a child.
She is a child, but she also doesn't know how to have these conversations. She's never had to actually compromise in her life. And so she's learning these skills and how to compromise from Edward's weaponized compromises, like we were talking about before. Like, she's just learning these really unhealthy relationship tactics from the Cullens and thinking it's okay. It's so bad. Bridget, before you touched very briefly on the virtue conversation and whether or not it's influenced by religion, I think that was a very thinly veiled attempt at bringing in no sex before marriage, which, whether or not Edward believes in that is kind of irrelevant to me. I just think that that's like such a stupid thing to put in there. Like, you can be turned into a vampire, but there's no fucking before marriage, God damn it. Like,
I think it is really interesting. I have seen Twilight referred to as purity porn before.
Yes.
Because as we've noted, they're completely sexless up to this point. And I think it's interesting because I remember these books as being quite raunchy. Like, I thought they were really something. And I did not register at all that they didn't have sex until Breaking Dawn. And reading them again, I was like, holy shit. But it is definitely very interesting, like those religious undertones, almost overtones, of like virtue, saving someone's soul, no sex before marriage. Then almost like the punishment that comes in Breaking Dawn as a result of like unfettered lovemaking or whatever.
Yeah.
Granted, they are married, but that will be, God knows, a really interesting conversation when we get there.
They barely make out, even in Eclipse. They only really start making out when she thinks they're about to have sex, which they don't. They don't even talk about it. She just like takes it a bit further than she normally does. But it's just funny, like the distinction, like kissing, sex. There's no in between. That's it for them.
That is so true. And I think something that we haven't even spoken about as well is how Bella is always almost like blacking out from making out with Edward. Like, she loses the plot completely, and I think that is a really interesting way of portraying it. Like, Bella is unrestrained. She is wanting him desperately, and then he's setting up these barriers of like, you're taking it too far. You will be damaged, hurt, punished, killed, whatever, if we cross this line of taking this to a place where it shouldn't go. And maybe that place is just the fact that he is a vampire and he has the power to kill her. He thirsts for her blood. Or maybe there is some sort of subliminal messaging there that they should not be taking this relationship any further because it would be impure and not good.
I think he doesn't even take his shirt off until Breaking Dawn. Like, I'm pretty sure she's stunned by his shirtless body when he's in the water.
Yeah, because she only sees a glimpse of it in the meadow.
It's so funny.
There's so much I want to say about this thing because, like you were saying, Laura, like, they talk a lot about how she will be quote unquote damaged after this. And we're meant to think that it's just about him being stronger than her and physically hurting her. But the talk around virtue and that she would be damaged goods if they had sex outside of marriage is disgusting. Like, the concept of purity and virtue, that she's only virtuous if she's a virgin or having sex inside a marriage, disgusting. But what I cannot fathom is the inference that he is still a virgin and that he doesn't want her to take his virtue when he's 117 years old. You cannot be telling me he's not been having sex for any of that time.
He's never thought of it, Erin. It's never crossed his mind.
It's not possible.
There have been people that have expressed interest in him, but he's never felt anything for them. He's always pushed them away.
Right.
So he's never felt anything for anyone.
Which is insane because if we are to believe he is mentally frozen as a 17-year-old boy, that in no way checks out.
No. But also, it does also kind of check out that he is this, like, awkward little virgin because every time they start making out, and I'm guessing he's starting to get a boner, he, like, chucks her across the room.
Yeah.
Like,
And,
calm down, Edward.
Imagine how that would make you feel. I really, really feel for Bella in these moments where he's punishing her with silence or he's punishing her for feeling human. Like, whether intentional or not, like these lines in the sand he draws between like, Bella, you're making this too hard for me, throwing her across the room, pushing her away from him. That rejection would absolutely shatter me as a 17-year-old. As a 29-year-old, that would shatter me. I always feel so bad for her in those bits.
And it's, again, so manipulative. It's like, yeah, we can kiss. Well, we can't kiss that much. What are you doing? That's so hard for me. No, I won't have sex with you until we get married, so let's get married. No, like, just no conversation about, I don't know, taking it slow perhaps, or like actual boundary setting.
As a 14, 15-year-old, when I was reading this, I I didn't think that deeply about it. I don't think I had much going on in my head about like the undertones of this. I do remember feeling bad for Bella and feeling rejected. I remember thinking, what's the big deal? Can't they just have sex? But
Me, the whole book. Like, just get it over with. Let's go, boys.
But, I mean, I wasn't thinking very much about the messaging, and I never really thought twice about Stephenie Meyer, and I didn't know what a Mormon was and all of that kind of business. So it's interesting because there are the messages that you just absorb anyway, regardless of whether you understand where they come from or not.
What I think or have always thought about this is even if you believe in souls, heaven, afterlife, absolution, whatever, even if you believe that, he's worried that if they sleep together, they will lose their virtues. They are immortal. There is no afterlife because they are living forever. Even if there is a heaven, they're never going.
Yeah.
Because they're living for the rest of eternity. Why is he so worried about something that's not ever going to happen? They will be forever. They are immortal.
That is a really good plot hole, mate.
Well, both of them have threatened suicide multiple times over these 3 books so far, so you never know.
They really do just be being like, well, I'll just kill myself then.
Yeah.
I'll just do it.
It's so...
Like, if they're going to live their happy life together as a married couple, that's it.
Continuing on with the kind of sex and virtue theme, I think it's a good time to segue into a conversation about Jacob. And I think this is definitely a part of a larger theme throughout the book, which is like vampires, good, virtuous, classy, controlled, care about where you go when you die, versus werewolves, angry, hot-headed, uncontrolled, cannot be tamed, non-consensual kissing bad boys.
It's very interesting that we see Edward always drawing these lines and being like, no, I can't cross these lines. I'm so controlled. But then in enforcing those boundaries, he gets really angry and behaves like a freak, compared to Jacob, who does have anger issues as a result of his turning. But when he needs to really have control, such as when he's around the vampires, he has it. Like, they always say he's out of control, but he's not. For a lot of Eclipse, he's in his human form, right? He has the control, and yet we see him do these really fucked up things, like all these unsolicited, non-consensual kisses in this book are so gross. It's gross to read them, and it's gross to hear about them. What I also think is really gross about the kiss is that Bella has no autonomy in it. The lines are literally like, I clear my mind and let it happened.
My body took over.
Disgusting.
It very closely toes the line, or I don't think it really toes it actually, between lust and rape. The language that she uses to describe these scenes, particularly the second kiss after she asks him to kiss her. Her response,
she's manipulated into asking.
Yes. Yeah. Her response is shut down, accept it, don't antagonize him, don't push him. And the language used around him kissing her is forceful and violent and angry. And I was a bit scared reading it, honestly, as an adult. I was like, this is distinctly not good. I hate this.
It's gross. And we mentioned it a bit in the New Moon episode and haven't really touched on it yet here. Jacob has huge character assassination in this book. I don't believe that Jacob would kiss her that forcefully without consent. Maybe like a peck or whatever in the heat of the moment, and then when she doesn't respond, maybe pull back. I could see that for Jacob. The way he does it here, it just seems so out of character, and it's really fucked up. And you can't take the fact that they're people of colour out of this. The way that she's saying these people of colour are animals and they are uncontrolled compared to these white purists who can do no wrong ever, even though they do so much wrong.
Yeah.
Like, it's just really messed up. And if she wanted to write Jacob kissing her and it being a point of tension for them, she could absolutely have done that without making it so disgusting and so forceful and really aggressive.
Really aggressive.
It makes me hate Jacob after I've just been turned into liking him in New Moon. Like, he's a completely different character in this book.
I have the quote here. Bella has asked Jacob to kiss her. She says, I knew he would take advantage of the situation. I expected it. I held very still, my eyes closed, my fingers curled into fists at my side, as his hands caught my face and his lips found mine with an eagerness that was not far from violence. I could feel his anger as his mouth discovered my passive resistance. One hand moved to the nape of my neck, twisting into a fist around the roots of my hair. The other hand grabbed roughly at my shoulder, shaking me, then dragging me to him. His hand continued down my arm, finding my wrist and pulling my arm around his neck. I left it there, my hand still tightly balled up, unsure how far I could go in my desperation to keep him alive. All the while, his lips, disconcertingly soft and warm, tried to force a response out of mine.
The first one is just as bad. I hate how this one is described. And his reaction after it. Like, what he says to her is terrible as well. She says no before he's even kissed her. He kissed me angrily, roughly, his other hand gripping tight around the back of my neck, making escape impossible. I shoved against his chest with all my strength, but he didn't even seem to notice. And then she grabbed at his face, trying to push it away, failing again. He seemed to notice this time, though, and it aggravated him. His lips forced mine open, and I could feel his hot breath in my mouth, and she just shut down. He says something at some point like it had to be better than kissing that vampire or something.
Yikes.
She was
so
trying
gross.
to push. She punched you.
Yeah.
And she said no. Before you even started, she said no. Prior to this point, he has said, I love you. And she has said, I don't feel the same. Say what you will about her using him, that still in no way gives him permission to do that to her. No is no. Like, it is a line in the sand. It cannot be any more clear.
And I think because of how gross those scenes make you feel, when Bella comes home and she's got her broken wrist and Charlie's like, oh, what happened? She's like, oh, I punched Jacob because he tried to kiss me. And he's like, that a boy. Like, Charlie, mate. Like,
so disappointing.
And I guess he doesn't know the context to which it happened. He wasn't there and she's obviously not told him. But that's, bro, buddy, come on.
And then the only lesson that Charlie gives her as a follow-up to that is when he's like, oh, you must have been punching wrong. Like, next time, make sure that you, like, keep your thumbs out inside your fist or whatever it is. I don't even know. I'd be punching wrong too. But that's not the lesson there. I think he does say something like, oh, he shouldn't have done that.
As much as I like Jacob, no one should be kissing without your consent.
And then he's like, I never thought I would have had to teach you how to throw a punch. Or you could teach her how to deal with these situations in other ways.
And you could stop doing your part and encouraging them.
Yeah, exactly.
I've even felt uncomfortable every time I read this book about the physical intimacy between Jacob and Bella, because it's forced upon Bella as well. And he's always wanting to hold her hand. He's got his arm around her all the time. He kisses her on the head. He is always touching her. And even that is crossing a line. She's made her choice.
Jacob is so messy in this book. When he didn't have to be, he could still be an antagonist and an alternate love interest without this really gross behavior.
That's the thing that kills me, is because when he was being nice, she was almost there. Like, I was so happy in those parts in New Moon where he was nice and friendly, and her sunshine Jacob that she says, he was the perfect antidote to Edward. And what they had was so healthy and so functional. And then they've twisted him into this horrible, nasty man, or boy still. And it wasn't necessary. Like, the actual convincing love triangle was for Jacob to just stay being a good option rather than this toxic man that she has an interest in for some reason.
Yeah, and we've talked a little bit about the like macho 1v1 between Edward and Jacob. Personally, I really like the scene where Jacob says to Edward, like, I almost had her. Even though it makes Bella like an object and stuff, I like the antagonism of being like, you left, I almost had her, and then you came back and you fucked it all up. But I wish he continued, like you said, on that positive trajectory and didn't do all this gross shit and instead just pointed out the obvious to Bella that no one else was ever pointing out. Babe, what are you doing? That he should have been the voice of reason.
He's in a unique position. Instead of flipping out every time something's mentioned.
Yeah.
Like, bring her down to earth instead of overreacting.
Jacob is quite reasonable. He's been reasonable in New Moon and stuff. Like, he has a pretty level head on his shoulders.
So I think at the top of the episode, we sort of alluded to the end of New Moon, where there's an epilogue where Jacob rocks up and reminds Edward and Bella of the treaty between the Cullens and the Quileute tribe, or the werewolves. The treaty states that the treaty will be void if any of the Cullens bite another human. The Cullens and the extra vampires that are flowing in and out of Forks have forced the transition of the wolves. Something that I think is very important to note is that the Quileute people aren't an invention of Stephenie Meyer. They are a real Native American nation that live in La Push in Washington. And I have an article pulled up as well where, in conjunction with the Burke Museum in Seattle, they have been working to correct the misconceptions that the series has started about them.
I think I remember reading an interview with Stephenie Meyer where she was talking about her creation process, and she was like, I'd just been researching like werewolves and myths and things, and then I'd already decided on my location being Forks, and then I was like, wait, there's actually a tribe nearby, and how funny. Like, she was sort of like, what a coincidence, it was meant to happen.
Yikes.
Yeah, just profiting off this.
Summit Entertainment, who produced the movies or distributed the movies, I'm not quite sure, and Stephenie Meyer have made an insane amount of money profiting off the stories or the history of these real people, and apparently they have not received a dime. I'm looking at an article called Adjusting the Focus on Twilight's Misconceptions by Dr. Deanna Dart Newton, who is a curator of Native American ethnology. And it mentions that with the recent pop culture phenomenon Twilight, the Quileute people have found themselves thrust into the global spotlight. The reservation, a once quiet and somewhat isolated place, is now a popular tourist destination for thousands of middle school-aged girls and their families. In the wake of the popularity of the book and film, the Quileute tribe has been forced to negotiate the rights to their own oral histories, ancient regalia, and mask designs, and even the sanctity of their cemetery.
For her to have had that big of an impact on them, and then also to just treat it like, oh, teehee, what a coincidence. I would be fuming if I was them.
There's this another article I'm looking at called Cultural Theft in Twilight. So it's also on the Burke Museum website. So it seems like one of the main offenses here is that Stephenie Meyer sort of fabricated the origin story or altered it to suit her own needs or the needs of the story as she sees them. Apparently, the Quileute origin story that Stephenie Meyer has used in the books is relatively unknown, but in presenting a real tribe to the far reaches of Twilight's audience, she's quote-unquote unjustly rewritten Quileute identity into that of magical werewolves. It's so cheapened, hey?
This is kind of in line with the comments that we made during our Red, White and Royal Blue episode, where you can base something in reality but make it different enough so that you're not messing with actual history, which is, I think, probably what she should have done here. If she wanted to go down the Native American route here, she should have done it, A, with respect and with research, but also she should have developed her own nation that's not based in any real nation, but is based on a lot of the principles that these people apply. So it is still authentic and it's still real without actually impacting a real group of people.
It didn't even need to be a different cultural group. It could have even just been a family bloodline.
Aside from the fact that she's obviously gotten their history wrong and has just rewritten it in her favor, I think also the way she makes these characters behave would reflect really poorly on these people as well. And if I was them, I would feel really upset at the representation that they're getting here, because it's not good representation. They're seen in really negative lights. And then they also get tied up in these really weird things, such as imprinting. A lot of what we learn about imprinting in this book is really questionable, and I certainly would not want to be associated with that as a real life group of people.
And once again, comparing them to animals. I think before I said that it's a weird choice for Stephenie Meyer to make, to take someone's culture and just rework parts of it that suit her story, but it reminds me of the scene from an episode of Parks and Recreation when there is a Native American man and he says, white people love a curse.
Yeah.
He says, white people love a curse. And I think that it's the same sort of thing. She's used it to try to make it seem mystic and magical and like a little bit spooky and otherworldly, but
yes,
it didn't have to be that way.
For our benefit. Like I think like white people are like obsessed with like mysticism and these people that have this connection to the land and earth and this like folkloric kind of quality that is something, I mean, I personally can't relate to. And I think that there is a tendency in this kind of media or, I don't know, fiction or whatever to absolutely just wring Indigenous cultures dry and just take whatever last drop that we enjoy from that kind of thing for our own personal pleasure.
It's really the like Pocahontas treatment.
They trivialize it, make it so commercialized and take away the reality of it. These are real stories and they can be really impactful to the people that they come from. And so it's really unfair to just treat them as like entertainment value.
And you know what? Like, she truly could have just made it up, because when I reread this, I got to the chapter where they were sharing their stories and the story of the third wife, and I thought to myself, I have no memory of this. And I honestly think, just like Carlisle's chapter, I must have just been like, skip, like it's not Edward and Bella. I was only, like everything that wasn't Edward and Bella was like the Sam and Frodo chapters of The Lord of the Rings to me, like skip every time. I did not give a shit. She didn't have to misuse somebody's culture to make her story interesting, because teenage girls at this point in time, teenage girls did not give a shit about that. Like, I did not care. I did not know that it was connected to real life people. It could have been made up. They were werewolves. It didn't have to be connected to anything in reality for me. It was wolf, vampire, girl, hooray.
It's also very interesting that the tribe has never been financially compensated or even just supported by the people that have made so much money off their culture, especially when their community is located in a tsunami zone. A catastrophic earthquake can wipe out the community in less than 10 minutes, and an entire generation of the people will cease to exist. So I have seen a lot of people on TikTok talking about donating to them. So if you are interested in supporting, maybe that would be a good place to head to.
Let's talk a bit more about the imprinting, because we get a lot of the background on how imprinting works in this book. It's first brought up in New Moon when they explain the Sam, Leah, Emily love triangle. But we get a lot more context in this one as we learn more about the other wolves in Jacob's pack, and we learn that some of them have started finding their mates as well, which makes Jacob feel very lonely. He's a little lonely boy. But we get some gross background to imprinting in this, including that you can imprint with literal children and babies because it's just an instant connection and there's no knowing when it'll happen or what'll spark it. And Jacob tells Bella Quill has imprinted on Emily, Sam's mate, on her niece, Claire, who is 3 years old. 2 years old, everybody. This is a 15-year-old boy/man werewolf imprinting on a 2-year-old. And when Jacob tells Bella, Bella's like, ew, gross. And he's like, nah, it's not like that.
He gets really defensive.
Yeah, he's like, don't make it weird. It's not weird. And
it's not like that.
He dials it back a little bit and he's like, look, it doesn't have to be romantic. Like, he just wants to be a really good brother to her, blah, blah, blah. And in that sentence, I'm like, still weird. But if it is just like being a good brotherly figure, I can get on board with that.
Yeah, like if you're their protector?
Yeah.
I'm on board. That's fine.
You're going to be their mentor, their like life coach, perhaps. Happy days. That sounds great. I would love a life coach. But then it gets weird again because they talk about how he will like wait until she's old enough. And I'm like, A, what is old enough? B, why are you just hanging around this child until she is old enough? Like, you can't say that you're just going to be like a big brother to them when you're actually waiting around until they are old enough to trigger or start that romantic connection. That's predatory. That's grooming.
And it goes against what Jacob is telling us. Like, he has that thing, like you said, where he tries to dial it back and said, it's not like that. It's nothing sexual about it at all. But then everything we learn about imprinting after that says, yes, it is sexual, because we are repeatedly told in this book, and again, I'm sure we'll have a big conversation about this in Breaking Dawn, but they're just waiting it out. Like, there is literally a quote in this on page 175 where Jacob says, Quill is not getting any older. He'll just have to be patient for a couple of decades.
Gross. Yeah. So gross.
I tried really hard to sort of go along with the story, this time especially. I don't remember my thought. I mean, I always thought it was weird, but I don't really remember any strong thoughts about it. But I tried really hard to go along with the story this time. And when I got to that part in Breaking Dawn where Quill and Claire are at the beach together, I was just so disgusted. She's like hitting him on the head with rocks and he's finding rocks for her. And she's a literal toddler using toddler speak, and he's treating her like his daughter, his little sister. I just don't know how in 15 years' time, 16 years' time, how he will be able to separate the child, the baby that he spent time babysitting on the beach, and a woman that he's going to be in love with and, assuming marry and have a physical relationship with. How can you separate those two things? I don't understand.
Another gross thing about imprinting as well is that it does, for the most part, seem to be a one-sided thing. Like the werewolf imprints upon someone, and Bella does have a question where she says, doesn't Claire get a choice? And Jacob says, as if he couldn't win her over. And he goes on to explain, or I think he explains a little bit earlier on when he's first talking about imprinting. He says it's hard to get past that level of commitment and adoration. And I think the idea that Stephenie Meyer tries to give you about imprinting is that if you're just persistent, you can wear down anyone. Like if you just give somebody your everything, if you do every single thing for them, if you obsess over them, if you never, ever, ever leave them alone, it's in the bag. You got this.
That is the lesson to be learned out of this, is that, by God, if you try, you will get whoever you want. I had forgotten that he said, why wouldn't she like Quill, essentially? Like, it is so bizarre, but it's also such a change on the way they talk about Leah, Sam, and Emily in New Moon. Because there is a bit of sympathy in there for Leah, like, she didn't stand a chance, it wasn't her fault, but it's like fucked them all up, and like everyone feels bad about it. And then in this one, they're like, nah, like, why wouldn't you want that connection? Why wouldn't you want it written in the stars for you? Like, I fucking wouldn't want it written in the stars for me.
No, thank you.
I can't quite find the section that I'm talking about, but I'm pretty sure also that the reason that is given for imprinting is so the werewolves can find people with a strong bloodline that will continue on the werewolf gene. And so at its core, it's about reproduction.
Selective breeding.
I struggle with the concept of like that mating bond and like the really strong reactions it brings out of people. So in this book, they're talking about their engagement in the tent, and Jacob overhears and he goes off and he howls and whatever, and it's dramatic, but I kind of like that. I kind of like that he is so upset and their connection is so strong that he has to like turn into his werewolf self and like bay at the moon or whatever. But then I don't like what happens if they do nothing about their mated bond? Why can't they just choose to do nothing about it?
And I think it goes back to the classy controlled vampires and savage wolves, because again, Edward wants to drink Bella's blood, but he manages to master that, and yet it's impossible for any of the wolves to overcome these instincts that are weighing in against them. Spoiler alert, but Jacob has no choice but to imprint on a baby. It's completely out of his control, and yet Edward could manage it. It's gross. I hate it so much. And it's one of those things that makes me wonder again, was Stephenie Meyer always trying to set us up to pick Edward? Because there's just so many things in this book about Jacob that are just so screwed up.
I fully think that. I think New Moon would have come out, people start being Team Jacob in a way they never were in Twilight, because I didn't realize Jacob's not really in Twilight. But after New Moon, you have a clear divide of fans then. And she's like, fuck that, that's not what I wanted, so I'm about to make Jacob the worst character ever, and you're all going to have to deal with the consequences of my actions.
One more thing about imprinting as well, and I don't think this would come to a shock or is any sort of revelation, but there is a quote as well from Jacob when he's describing the experience of imprinting, and he says something like, when you see her, it's like nothing else. I think that just tells you that there are no queer vampires and no queer werewolves.
Yeah.
No queer werewolves.
I actually was thinking that rereading it now, because we read it the first time, I feel like I wasn't thinking so much about queer representation, but reading it now, I'm like, well, where are the gay vampires and where are the gay werewolves?
Not even vampires or werewolves. People.
Where are the gay people? You're right. You're so right.
They can't exist because how can you breed?
Yeah, you're so right. At the end of the day, it is about breeding. And heaven forbid they adopt. Only straight vampires can adopt. Charlie has obviously imprinted on Carlisle anyway, so...
I've seen theories online that Alice is imprinted on Bella.
Well, see, that's actually... I think this is a good convo to have, because, like I said, when I read it the first time, I had no thoughts about any kind of queerness that is or could be in the book. And reading it this time, eyes were opened to Charlie and Carlisle. I had not considered it before this reread. And I'm like, how did I never think about this? But I also know that people thought Alice and Bella should have been gay, or like Rosalie and Bella, which I get less than Alice and Bella.
Angela as well.
Angela and Ben do give off the vibes of two high school people who are dating to make life easier for each other and are going to be each other's, like, bridesmaid and best man at their gay wedding in 10 years. Like, that's the vibes I'm getting for those. Angela is Ben's beard. But I do think it's interesting that fans will do this anyway, but they inserted queer representation in the story when they couldn't find it themselves. And it was so fun and exciting, in a sense, to read this and see those opportunities for queerness that could have existed and maybe should have existed to make it a bit more exciting and a bit more interesting.
Excitement was severely missing. Like, when you think about the Volturi rock up in this, there's an army of newborn vampires, Victoria's on the loose, there's werewolves and vampires. And the drama we got was a love triangle. Like, it's just so many missed opportunities. And it took up the whole book.
Yeah, I really, really want to talk about this because, as I said at the start, I was excited for this to have some action. There is no action in this book. There is all this build-up. Fucking Victoria is back again. The least exciting antagonist ever. She has nothing going for her. Her, like, army of baby vampires is actually pretty cool and exciting.
I think it's a great concept, and we were actually robbed. We didn't even get to see them in action.
I know, that's what I'm going to say. Like, so one of the most common, like, comparisons is Twilight and ACOTAR. Twilight is nowhere near ACOTAR. Like, ACOTAR is full of battle scenes and action, and even when Feyre isn't in the scene, you can see the action and you feel the tension is there. Even though we know it's going to have a happy ending, the stakes are still high. There are no stakes here. There is an army of newborn vampires that get bested in 2 seconds.
And we have to hear so much about the training. And Jasper's we haven't even talked about Jasper yet.
Oh my God.
Like the experience, the training of the newborn vampires and how dangerous they are and what a threat they are. We don't even see them. We come in and we just see steaming piles of vampire parts. And one lone newborn that's left because she surrendered.
Yeah.
I just read it, but the reality that we never even saw more than one of the alleged newborn army. Oh my God.
It's because it's such a good idea.
It's because they're in the fucking tent that whole time.
They're hiding.
That is, and the way that Bella, like, manipulates Edward into not being in the action. Like, she uses the fact that he's abandoned her before. She's like, I couldn't bear it. I would die if you were away from me. She's using this such extreme language. And then we have to suffer through that scene. Oh my God.
While we're talking about the newborn army, I think maybe we should quickly talk about Jasper's questionable past and just the pride that he has for his past. So Jasper is, in the books and in the movies, a proud Confederate soldier. He lied about his age to join, and he quickly rose through the ranks. An interesting side to pick for the war.
For the American Civil War.
Not good. Also, his name, Major Jasper Whitlock, ma'am. So Stephenie, when she was sharing her genius creative process once again, just digs herself into a hole deeper and deeper every time she opens her mouth, it seems. But she found Jasper and Whitlock in the Confederate Army roles. They weren't together. They were Jasper someone and someone Whitlock, but she put them together. And then I was thinking that surely in the movie they didn't make a point of saying Confederate Army, but no, they did in the movie as well. And so if you couple that with the canon fact that vampires are frozen at their age of development, both physically and mentally, you would have to assume that Jasper
is a big old fucking
racist. Yeah. He's a skinhead with curls, basically.
You have blown my mind.
And so Alice as well was in the, early 18th century or 1800s, I can't remember, but she was in Mississippi. So, I mean, things aren't looking too good for her either, because I've seen a lot of talk online about how, no, Alice changed Jasper. She helped him. But Stephenie has said they are frozen at their physical and mental development, the age that they were. So I don't think we can pretend that any of them are anti-racist.
And also the fact that throughout his whole description of his time in the army, they spend no small amount of time on it. And he never says, I was a confused young man or, you know, I didn't know what I was signing up for. He's like, hell yeah, brother, I was in the Confederate Army.
The best parts of his life were in the army.
And it's an interesting comparison to Carlisle, because when we talk about his history, he's like, oh, look, I was a bit confused in the beginning. I did some things I probably shouldn't have done. But Jasper has none of that reflection. He's just like, here's all the crazy shit that I did. Even when he talks about being in the newborn army, he doesn't necessarily say that he didn't like it or thought he was doing the wrong thing. It's like he just suddenly saw that there was another option and was like, I'll try that one out for a while.
I love that the research that Stephenie decided to do was in relation to this. I don't think, like we discussed, I think, in the Twilight episode, the vast historical inaccuracies in this series. And she's like, no. I want these names to be right.
Yeah. I want real Confederate soldier
Real
names. But what also is funny, and I've said it 50 million times in these episodes, is that I didn't remember anything about these stories beforehand. And I remember even before we decided to read these books, seeing on Twitter someone being like, oh, remember how Jasper is a Confederate soldier? And I was like, surely not. Yeah. Surely that is not true. And I'd kind of forgotten about it. And then when I was reading it for this, I was like, holy shit, that's like an actual canon fact. That's not even people reaching through like some referenced material. It is on the page.
I remember having the same revelation as well, because I wouldn't have really understood the implications of a Confederate soldier when I was reading this as a 13-year-old.
One random thing that I did like throughout Jasper's training about the newborn army was when the wolves and the werewolves did team up. And I especially like the scene when the wolves came out of the trees for the first time and the pack was way bigger than they expected it. And Edward and Emmett, I think it was, were like, hell yeah, so cool. They were like really excited.
Yes.
And I just wanted so badly, like I know we get little glimpses of it eventually. Thank God Seth Clearwater exists, because I love him and Edward together. But I just feel that we were robbed of these two teams working together as well. Like if the Volturi or Victoria, or had we seen the newborn army, if we had had any actual action, it would have been so good to see these two cool teams working together.
I really loved the training scenes. I did think they went on for a while. Like, I don't know why we had like 3 rounds of training scenes for a battle we don't even fucking see. I also loved when the wolves came out and they lay down in their wolf form, and like Edward is speaking on behalf of Sam and they start like sparring with Jasper. I just think that's so cool. And you know, Victoria is such an anticlimactic ultimate baddie. Like, she's been the baddie for 3 books. And her ending is nothing. Like, there is no return on investment with her. But you know what would have been sick is if the newborn army war or like battle was looking really bleak. Like, maybe we got some injured werewolves, the vampires are now outnumbered, and Jacob and Edward are up in this fucking mountain in the tent, and Edward's overheard what's happened and he's had to be like, well, fuck it, we ball, let's go. Let's figure out how to pass Bella between us while we fight, and like bring them into the action. And they are like struggling to fight. They're struggling to defend their families. They're struggling to both defend Bella. Like, that should have been the pinnacle of the teamwork that they'd developed. Like, let's also not forget that the tent scene is like full of Jacob and Edward's enemies to lover arc. Like, it is them just being like,
Throwing out.
like, just kiss already. Like, that is the ultimate enemies to lovers time. It would have been perfect to culminate that in them working together, like the two of them side by side to best the baddies.
It really is a Wattpad scene though. Like, could that have come from the mind of a 13-year-old girl? Yep. Definitely. What, your boyfriend and the other one that loves you have to share a room, share a tent.
There's only one tent.
Oh, it's incredible.
I ate that up.
Same. It's one of my favourite scenes.
I was so excited to get to it because I was like, I can't quite remember, but I remember it being good. And when I got there, I was like, what?
It's not as good, but it's still so good.
It's still one of my favorite
Yeah,
scenes.
and like what you were saying, Erin, with how it should have been the culmination of their friendship, I think it's disappointing because any headway they seem to make is almost immediately erased time and time again. But
Yeah.
I loved in that scene where I think Edward says, I think in another life you and I would have been really good friends.
Yes!
And then Jacob's kind of like, oh, maybe, maybe not. I can't remember. I think he says something to kind of shut it down.
This is even not, even if you weren't trying to kill the woman that I love or something.
Yeah, and I liked those lines, and
they should have kissed.
they should have kissed.
I don't want to make excuses for Edward, but or even like accept his irresponsible and like abusive, if we're being honest, behavior. But when he backed off, I thought, thank God.
He made so much headway in my eyes in this book because at the start of this book, I was genuinely quite terrified of him. I think I said it earlier, mercifully, his extreme control over Bella, like forbidding her to see Jacob and that kind of stuff, actually seems to only take place over a couple of days. And it's still not excusable, but like those scenes where Bella disappears out of Alice's vision because she's mingling her future with the werewolves. And then when she leaves La Push, he's like in his car behind her, like with the headlights on. And she's too scared because she's like, I'm going to be in trouble. He's going to be so angry. I shouldn't have upset him. Like that made me feel horrible inside. Like that is not a nice way to feel around the person you just agreed to marry and you're about to tether your whole life to that person. He was awful. And then also that coupled with the fact that he was just completely smothering her. Like I felt so claustrophobic in those scenes. Bella tells Jacob, hey, I am going to become a vampire. And then he says that horrible shit to her about like, you'd be better off dead. I hope you die instead. Every single scene where Bella starts crying in this book, Edward is in her window or somehow climbing in her car, holding her in his arms and being like, it's okay, it's okay. Like back off, my guy. Oh, he was insufferable. But then, like you said, he does have that switch where he's like, this is not working actually. I'm pushing you further away.
I don't want to be that guy, sort of. Yeah.
I've realized I'm not listening to you. Oops. My bad.
Sorry for dismantling your truck.
Oh, like the controlling shit was so fucked. The car thing, Alice literally kidnapping her. It was all so fucked up. I think it's interesting that you say he realizes he wasn't listening to her. I don't think that's what makes him change.
Do you think it's because he realizes the way he was trying to manipulate her wasn't working, so he switched it up?
No, I think it's that he realized that Jacob was doing all the work he needed to do anyway, so he could just back off.
Just screw it up.
Yeah. We're made to think that Edward fixes his behavior. He doesn't. He just stops doing anything and lets Jacob hang himself. Like, Edward does not redeem himself here. He doesn't learn anything. He's just letting Jacob fuck it all up anyway because it ultimately doesn't matter what Edward does because Jacob's doing all the bad stuff. And it is, again, further villainizing Jacob when I don't think he would have behaved in those ways.
I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
I don't think either of these men are good options.
No.
I totally agree with the comment earlier. We're like pot, kettle.
Yes.
Like, there are no redeemable characters in this book. They're all so unpleasant.
And I think what is interesting that these are bad people. It's a bad romance. It's a bad example of everything. And I remember even after I'd read it for the first time and like the movies were big and people were like, oh, it's abusive, Edward's bad, it's not good romance. And I remember being like, what are you talking about? There's nothing wrong in these books. And reading it now, I'm like, holy shit, how are we allowed to read these? This should not be YA fiction.
When I was Googling some stuff a few days ago, Twilight won an award in 2006 for Best Children's Book.
And
Insane.
I don't know, I guess it has a lot to do with the echo chamber that you exist in because, like, I have had discussions about Twilight recently with people that are older than me and they insist, like, they reread Twilight regularly and it's like, this is a romantic book. This is a romantic book. There's so much passion. There's so much devotion. And, like, I guess it depends on, like, you know, obviously art is subjective. Like I remember when we were starting to read these and I message you guys to say that I had just searched like Edward Cullen abusive, and the top result that came up was like a comment on Reddit that said, people say Edward's abusive all the time, but he has low self-esteem, therefore he can't be abusive. Like,
Wow.
you can spin it whichever way you want. Like,
Yes.
This is my read on it. I'm not surprised I liked it as a kid, and I don't think it was like as damaging to me as it could have been because I read it at an age where I simply didn't see these problems.
Agreed.
But if I were a different person, or if I had like a less, you know, like loving, supportive family around me, if I had less role models of what a healthy relationship actually looks like, maybe this could have like prompted me to go searching for a different kind of path. I don't know.
So something that I wanted to talk about just as like a really quick aside is Jacob and Bella have this conversation. And so they talk about how the dynamics of the werewolf pack works. Jacob says he didn't want to be the alpha, even though it's in his bloodline to be the alpha. He didn't want to do it, and that's why Sam is. And she says that she makes up this term that he is the beta werewolf. And I think it's incredible that Stephenie Meyer is like making up what is a pretty common terminology for werewolf dynamics, or like even just wolf dynamics.
It's just like the Greek numbering system.
Yeah, like, and she's like, teehee, like, I made up this term that second in command wolf is the beta wolf, but I'm positive that's how like wolf dynamics and dog dynamics have been described for a really long time.
I think so.
And it's, but like, even if it wasn't, how would she even come up with that on her own? Like, Stephenie Meyer is so ridiculous, and Bella is equally as ridiculous for being like, teehee, I just made that up just then. It's so quirky and cool of me, and now everybody's going to call their second in command a beta.
Oh, it's very funny.
It was so annoying when I read it, and I forgot it even happened. And when it happened, I was like, get out of here. Naming them the betas. Get out.
I enjoyed that, and I think it really reminded me of something else that I just hate so much about this book, because it's like, not only is Bella a Mary Sue who happens to be the best and most special and perfect at everything, it's like everyone is. Edward is, Jacob is. We now find out he's not just a werewolf. First we find out he's not just her second option. Mm-hmm. He's not just her best friend. He's also a mythical creature, and he's the best one. He's the alpha, secretly. But it is truly exhausting to read. Like, can no one in this series be fallible?
They constantly talk down Bella's intelligence this whole time. But in every book, she has been the only person to connect the dots and be like, I think this is what's happening here, or this is what our strategy should be.
Every time
they're like, whoa, holy shit, Bella, like, you didn't come to play.
Meanwhile, it was obvious to literally every reader.
And I'm like, how you are centuries-old vampires / werewolves. You've even got literal army mages in your team, and you're all like, what do? I don't know what's happened here. And
All
Bella's
these things are connected? No.
yeah, and like Bella spent 2 seconds thinking about it and being like, guys, I think it's all about me. And they're like, holy shit, you're right.
The drama.
It's just crazy. Like,
That's funny.
who knew that Bella was such a mastermind?
I thought we'd just check back in with the Stephenie Meyer approved soundtrack for Eclipse. So we have Clocks by Coldplay.
Another interesting Coldplay choice.
Unfortunately, this one doesn't have the names next to it. I really did enjoy New Moon, how it had the V, E, and J next to them. I thought it was really clever. Well, I mean, clever. Interesting. Number 5, Stab My Back by the All American Rejects. I don't know that song, but I mean, I don't think she does either for most of them. I think she just reads the title and she thinks, yeah, that works.
It is giving a bit like MySpace. These are all the bands I listen to
It's
vibes.
very funny. Can relate. Number 7 is Mr. Brightside by the Killers.
Is that Edward?
How is that applying to this story?
Destiny is calling me. Maybe it's Bella.
Oh my God.
Jacob?
That is what's playing during the montage as they get ready to go up the hill for the 10th scene.
It might
Each of them like getting ready in their different bathrooms.
Yeah.
Destiny is calling
Very
me.
funny. Number 8 is Newborn by Muse, another song that I think she hasn't heard, but just read the title and thought, oh yeah, Newborn, cool. I mean, I haven't heard it either, but I'm not the one putting it in my list, so...
She is a Muse girly, though. I would believe she knows it.
Well,
Number 10 is Vindicated by Dashboard Confessional.
Ooh, that's a good song.
Number 11, Hysteria, Muse. Number 12, Uninvited, Alanis Morissette.
Okay, we're getting angsty.
We've got Yes Please, Muse at number 14. Blackout, Muse, number 17. Number 18 is It's a Disaster by OK Go. And then number 19, we have one choice plus 3 alternates because she couldn't make up her mind about the last song on the soundtrack. So
It's like, babe, this is made up anyway. You can put as many on there as you want.
Yeah. 19 is Falling Away with You by Muse. So the 3 alternates, 2 bangers and 1 I don't know. This Is How I Disappear by My Chemical Romance.
Banger.
Number 2, Sleep, My Chemical Romance.
Banger.
Different brand of banger, but still a banger.
Yeah.
And then number 3, The Well and the Lighthouse by Arcade Fire.
God, she loves Muse.
Yeah, she's really just put
on
like
the
a
payroll.
Muse mix CD together there.
I
Yeah.
wonder, like, I don't know how Muse feel about Stephenie Meyer, but I think, like, not to say they couldn't have been successful on their own, but I imagine they would have a whole host of fans they wouldn't have had otherwise due to the absolute colossal success of this franchise. I don't think we have much else to add, but I think it's good to keep in mind the note we're ending Eclipse on. So we know now that Edward and Bella will be getting married, and we know now that there is an ultimatum. Bella is going to become a vampire, or so we assume, in the next book. Before we start discussing Breaking Dawn, I would really just love to check back in with Bella's motivations behind becoming a vampire.
God, I can't wait. I can't wait for this. You are ready for this. Like, you've got the page ready to go.
I am ready because I was not just staggered, I was amazed when I read this. It's on page 344. Bella is a little bit freaked out about Jasper's stories about newly created vampires. Now those stories jumped into sharp focus with the news of his and Emmett's wager. I wondered randomly what they were betting. What was a motivating prize when you had everything? I'd always known that I would be different. I hoped that I would be as strong as Edward said I would be. Strong and fast. And most of all, beautiful. Someone...
Jesus Christ. This is the most shallow, like, surface level story.
At least she's being honest for a change.
You're right. She knows this part of herself quite well.
The follow-up, most of all beautiful. Someone who could stand next to Edward and feel like she belonged there.
It makes me want to stab myself in the face. Like, how are we 3 books into this story? They've both almost died. They've both come back together, declared their undying love for each other time and time again, and she's still like, I shouldn't be next to you. I
Am
deserve
I
to be
not
next
pretty
to
enough?
you. Like, baby girl, get some self-esteem for the love of God.
I love that she's not thinking, oh, how many innocent people am I going to kill? Like, I'm going to have to deal with my thirst. No, I hope I'm beautiful.
God, I hope we're equals.
God, I hope I am as hot as Edward is.
Like, you know what would be much easier, Bella? Like, just go get some plastic surgery if you don't like the way you look. Like,
this is something I have always thought, though. If she, like, she knows that she's going to have a physical transformation, and that's one of the reasons why she can never see Charlie and Renee again. But she is so accident prone. They use it as an excuse all the time whenever something happens. I don't understand why they don't pretend that she got into a fiery car crash, her face melted off or something. She got plastic surgery, and now she looks like this. Yeah. I don't understand why that was never an option. Honestly.
Zac Efron.
no. Yeah. Oof. Sorry, Zach. Sorry if you're listening, Zach.
Well, like Michael Jackson, like, is, you know.
Yeah, no, I fully agree because, and her change is not that severe. No. Like, isn't it literally just that they get quote unquote prettier? Like, what does that even mean for Bella anyway? But you're absolutely right. Just say, I was really fucked up and the Cullens helped pay for plastic surgery for me.
Yeah.
Done.
You know what? Like, so Carlisle's cover should have just been that he was a plastic surgeon.
That's a great idea.
Well, there was already the rumor that they all had plastic surgery. Why don't they just make it into a
double
reality? Yeah.
I guess then he couldn't be doing meaningful work as defined by him.
But also, Charlie is never going to notice. Like,
So true.
he is not gonna know.
But I just think like a car crash or some traumatic accident would explain everything. Like it would explain the change in her voice, like damage to her vocal cords. It could explain the change to her eyes, change to her
retina's
skin
detached.
tone. Like she could, yeah, I don't know. I just really feel like this just
Had
solves
eye
all the
transplants.
problems. Yeah.
I think that's good. I never thought about that before.
That's incredible.
I feel like Stephenie Meyer never did either. Like she didn't think about anything.
Well, she didn't think about much. That's
No.
so true.
Slammed. All right, colleagues, let's do it. Fave characters. Bridget.
Edward.
Bridget. Laura.
I think I'm probably going to take the crumb of Seth Clearwater that I got in this book because it's all I need it. I need something to hold on to.
I think my favourite in this book, out of a very short list of people who could be favourites, is maybe the guy that I didn't remember his name, Riley. He was a bit of a bad bitch. He was out there causing some mischief. I think that's a pretty cool outcome for him.
I feel like on the topic of Riley, in the movie, he was played by that Australian actor, and I
The
think
hottie.
everybody really thought he was super duper hot, and there was just so much mania around him. I really thought Riley had a way, way bigger role to play in this book than the one scene where he's like, "Oh no,
Yeah.
I got goofed." Yeah.
It wasn't until you guys showed me those memes before that I even remembered that I think his name's Xavier Samuel is even in this.
That's a bad boy name.
It's a hot boy name for sure.
Xavier.
Xavier.
Xavier, get back here. His brother Zayden.
The pinnacle moment, as always. Lit or shit, Laura.
Oh man, this is really hard because I think I'm going to say lit, but at the same time, if I wasn't rereading this for the pod, I think I would have checked out of the reread by this book. I was just so sick of them all. Something compelled me. There's something in here that keeps pushing me on. So I'm going to say it's lit because even with the books that have been shit in the past, there hasn't really been that desire to keep going. I'm going to say lit.
I am also where you're at. I don't think I would have gotten this far if I was rereading it by myself. I think I would have stopped at Twilight. I really struggled there. So I would say this is a very low lit for me. Bridget.
Lit.
You're like, I stand by it. No notes.
Can't change my life now. We are probably not Team Jacob, probably not Team Edward, but we are most definitely Team Talk Lit. Make sure you subscribe to the show, and if you want to be on the same page as us, follow us at talklit.gethit on Instagram and TikTok.